The champagne flute shattered against the marble floor of the Blackwood mansion, its crystal fragments catching the light like fallen stars. Isabella Mendoza stood frozen in the doorway of her new husband's study, her wedding dress still pristine, white, a heart pounding as she watched Richard Blackwood methodically counting stacks of cash that definitely weren't supposed to exist. "Darling," Richard said without turning around, his voice carrying that same controlled tone that had charmed her parents 6 months ago. "I thought you were resting." The blood money, because that's what it had to be, lay spread across his mahogany, desk-like agrotesque wedding gift. Isabella's mind raced. 3 hours ago, she'd said "I do" to the most eligible bachelor in San Francisco. 3 hours ago, she'd thought she was marrying her way out of her family's crushing debt. 3 hours ago, she'd believed Richard Blackwood was her salvation. Now she wasn't sure if she'd married her savior or her executioner. "What is this?" she whispered, her voice barely audible over the rain hammering against the floor-to-ceiling windows. Richard finally turned, and for the first time since she'd known him, his mask slipped. The culture Argentine was gone, replaced by something cold and calculating. "This, my dear wife, is the first lesson of your new life. In the Blackwood family, we don't ask questions we don't want answered." The study door slammed behind Isabella with a finality that echoed through her soul. She was trapped legally, financially, and now, it seemed, physically. Her family's restaurant, the one her grandfather had built with his bare hands, would close within the week without Richard's money. Her parents, who'd a jaded decade in the past year trying to save their legacy, were counting on her. She'd married Richard to save them all. But as she stood in the hallway of his fortress-like mansion, still in her wedding dress, Isabella realized she might have just traded one kind of prison for another. The grandfather clock in the foyer chimed midnight, and somewhere in the darkness of the house, she heard the roar of a motorcycle engine cutting through the storm. Richard had mentioned his brother would be attending the wedding, though he'd never shown up. "Diego's the black sheep," Richard had explained with barely concealed disdain. "You won't need to worry about him." But as the engine grew louder, then suddenly cut off, Isabella found herself wondering if Diego Blackwood might be the only person in this house who wasn't lying to her. She was about to find out just how wrong that assumption could be. Diego Blackwood kicked off his motorcycle boots in the marble foyer, leaving muddy prints that he knew would infuriate the housekeeper. His leather jacket dripped rainwater onto the Persian rug, another small act of rebellion that cost nothing but said everything. He'd missed the wedding on purpose. Watching his brother manipulate another innocent woman into his web wasn't something Diego could stomach, especially not today. But he'd promised their dying mother had tried to maintain some connection to family, and a promise to a dead woman was sacred, even if the family was rotten to its core. Well, the prodigal son returns. Diego looked up to find a vision in white standing at the top of the grand staircase. Richard's new wife was supposed to be some desperate girl from a failing family, easy prey for his brother's particular brand of predation. What Diego saw instead was a woman whose dark eyes blazed with intelligence and barely suppressed fury. Her wedding dress transformed from symbol of joy to armor against whatever hell she had already discovered in the past few hours. "You must be Isabella," he said, pushing wet black hair away from his face. "I'm Diego." A disappointment. She descended the stairs slowly, and Diego noticed she moved like a dancer, graceful, controlled, but ready to bolt at any second. When she reached the bottom step, putting them at eye level, he saw something that made his chest tighten. Fear, yes, but also a determination that reminded him painfully of himself at 18, standing in this same foyer, deciding whether to stay and fight or run and survive. "Your brother's in his study," she said quietly, "counting money that looks like it came from some railoggle." Diego's jaw clenched. Richard was getting careless, or maybe he just didn't care anymore about hiding what he was from his new wife. "How much did you see?" "Enough to know I made a mistake." Her voice cracked slightly on the last word, and Diego had to resist the urge to reach out and comfort her. "My family needed the money from this marriage. Our restaurant ... We were going to lose everything, and now..." Isabella's laugh held no humor. "Now I think I might lose more than a restaurant." The lights flickered as thunder shook the house, and, in that moment of darkness, Diego made a decision that would change everything. "Come on," he said, grabbing her hand. "There's something you need to see before Richard realizes we're talking." "I can't. If he finds me, he won't. Richard's probably on a conference call with his associates, planning whatever deal that money's for." Diego's grip on her hand tightened. "Isabella, if you want to understand what you've walked into, need to trust me just this once." She hesitated, and Diego could practically see her calculating the risks. Trust the husband she'd just discovered was a criminal, or trust the brother-in-law she'd known for exactly 3 minutes. Neither option was appealing, but at least Diego was being honest about the danger. 5 minutes, she said finally. "Then I go back to my room and pretend this conversation never happened." Diego led her through the house, avoiding the main corridors where Richard might see them. As they walked, he found himself acutely aware of her presence, the whisper of her dress against her legs, the faint scent of jasmine in her hair, the way her hand felt small but strong in his dot. This was dangerous territory. Richard's wives had always been off limits, not out of respect for his brother but out of self-preservation. Richard didn't share and he never forgave betrayal, but something about Isabella made Diego want to break every rule he'd ever made for himself. He just hoped they'd both survive the consequences. The wine cellar beneath the Blackwood mansion stretched deeper than Isabella had imagined possible, its stone walls lined with bottles worth more than most people's annual salaries. But Diego wasn't leading her here for the vintage collection. "Richard doesn't come down here," he explained, pulling a flashlight from behind one of the wine racks. "He's claustrophobic, childhood trauma involving a locked closet, and our father's disciplinary methods." Isabella shivered, and not just from the cool air. "What kind of family did I marry into? The kind that destroys everything it touches." Diego's voice carried years of bitter experience. He led her to the far corner of the cellar, where a section of the wall looked different from the rest. New mortars, slightly mismatched stones, including each other. He pressed against a particular stone, and a section of the wall swung inward, revealing a hidden room. Isabella gasped. The space beyond was fitted out like a command center, multiple computer screens, filing cabinets, and walls covered with photographs, newspaper clippings, and what looked like surveillance photos. "Welcome to the real Blackwood Empire," Diego said grimly. Isabella stepped inside, her wedding dress incongruous among the evidence of criminal enterprise. Their photographs showed Richard with men she recognized from news reports about organized crime, then newspaper clippings detailed suspicious deaths, missing persons cases, and business deals that had gone catastrophically wrong for everyone except the Blackwood family. "My God," she whispered, picking up a folder labeled Mendoza Family Asset Acquisition. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside were detailed financial records, surveillance photos of her parents, her sister, even herself, going about her daily routine over the past 6 months. "He's been watching us." "Richard doesn't make impulsive decisions," Diego said, his voice gentler now. "Your family's restaurant was failing by accident. He orchestrated it, bought out your suppliers, had health inspectors perform checks, even had people leave fake negative reviews online. He created the crisis so he could zoom in and save you." Isabella sank into the room's single chair, the weight of manipulation crushing down on her. "But why? Why go through all this trouble for me?" Diego hesitated, then pulled out another file. This one was labeled simply Isabella. The photos inside weren't surveillance shots, they were professional photographs, the kind taken by private investigators. But what made Isabella's blood run cold were the notes in Richard's handwriting. "Subject exhibits strong family loyalty, exploitable. No significant romantic attachments, malleable, intelligent but desperate, perfect combination. Father's gambling debts provide additional leverage." "Your father gambles?" Diego asked quietly. Isabella's world tilted further off its axis. "No, Dad would never. He hates casinos, says they're a fool's game." But even as she said it, she remembered her father's recent late nights, his evasiveness about money, her mother's worried glances. "Richard's people are very good at finding weaknesses," Diego said, "and once they find them, they exploit them. Your father probably started with small bets, maybe even won a few times, but the house always wins in the end." "How long have you known about this?" "I've suspected Richard was involved in organized crime for years. I started putting together evidence about 3 months ago." Diego's jaw tightened. "I was planning to go to the FBI, but then I heard of Booth's engagement. I couldn't let him destroy another innocent woman." Isabella looked up at him, seeing him clearly for the first time. Diego Blackwood was nothing like his brother, where Richard was polished and controlled. Diego was raw and honest, where Richard's calculated advantages. Diego's eyes reflected genuine pain. "Another woman?" she asked. Diego's expression darkened. "Richard's been married twice before. Both wives died in accidents. The first stone, Elena, fell down the stairs 6 months after their wedding, broke her neck. The second one, Maria, had a car accident on a rainy night. Her brakes failed." The wine cellar suddenly felt even colder. "You think he killed them?" "I think Richard Blackwood is very good at making problems disappear permanently." Diego stepped closer, and Isabella could smell leather and rain and something uniquely masculine that made her heart race despite the terror of the situation. "Isabella, you need to leave. Tonight I can help you disappear. Start over somewhere safe." "I can't. My family will be safer without you here. As long as you're Richard's wife, you're all leverage he can use against you." Diego's hand touched her cheek, the contact sending electricity through her entire body. "But if you'd become someone else entirely?" The sound of footsteps echoed from the wine cellar above them. Diego immediately killed the flashlight, plunging them into absolute darkness. "He's looking for you," Diego whispered, his breath warm against her ear. "We need to get you back upstairs before he realizes you're missing." But as they stood in the darkness, Isabella became aware of something that terrified her more than Richard's criminal connections, or even the possibility that he'd murdered his previous wives. She was falling in love with Diego Blackwood, and that, she realized, might be the most dangerous thing of all. Isabella woke to the sound of Richard's voice in the hallway, crisp and commanding as he spoke to José on the phone. Sunlight streamed through the massive windows of the master bedroom, making everything look deceptively normal for a moment. She could almost pretend the previous night had been a nightmare. Then she saw the mud on her wedding shoes, and reality crashed back. Yes, the restaurant inspection is scheduled for this morning, Richard was saying. Make sure they find enough violations to shut it down permanently. We can't have loose ends. Isabella's heart stopped. He was talking about her family's restaurant, the one place her parents had left to call their own. After everything she'd sacrificed, Richard was still planning to destroy them. The bedroom door opened, and Richard walked in carrying a breakfast tray, his smile perfectly calibrated project-loving concern. Good morning, darling. I thought you might like breakfast in bed on our first morning as husband and wife. She wanted to scream, to throw the tray in his face, to demand he call off whatever he was planning. Instead, she forced herself to smile back. That's very thoughtful. You seemed tired last night after the reception. I hope you slept well. His tone was casual, but Isabella caught the subtle probe. He was checking if she'd noticed his absence, if she'd seen anything she shouldn't have. Like a baby, she lied. The excitement of the day just caught up with me. Richard sat on the edge of the bed, his hand resting possessively on her leg through the silk nightgown his staff had laid out for her. I'm afraid I have to go out for a few hours this morning. Business matters that require my personal attention, of course. I understand. Isabella kept her voice level even as her mind raced. If Richard was leaving, she could call her parents, warn them about the inspection. Maybe there was still time to save something from this disaster. Diego stopped by last night while you were sleeping, Richard continued, and Isabella felt the blood rain from her face. My brother has such terrible timing, always showing up when he's least welcome. I didn't hear him arrive. No, I don't suppose you would have. He was quite intoxicated, as usual. Made quite a mess in the foyer before stumbling off to the guest wing. Richard's eyes never left her face as he spoke. I do hope he doesn't disturb you while I'm away. Diego can be unpredictable when he's drinking. The warning was subtle but clear. Stay away from Diego. Richard might not know about their conversation in the wine cellar, but he suspected something. After Richard left, Isabella waited exactly 10 minutes before sneaking down to the kitchen. The house staff moved around her with practiced invisibility, but she noticed how they avoided eye contact, how they jumped at unexpected sounds. These people knew what Richard was capable of, and they were terrified. She found Diego in the kitchen garden behind the house, working on his motorcycle with the focused identity of a man trying to lose himself in a simple task. In the morning light, he looked younger, though no less dangerous. His dark hair fell across his forehead as he worked, and Isabella found herself memorizing the way his muscles moved beneath his worn t-shirt. Couldn't sleep either, she asked softly. Diego looked up, his wrench still in his hand. Richard's gone for a few hours. He's having my parents' restaurant shut down today. Isabella's voice cracked on fellest words. Even after I married him, he's still destroying them. Diego set down his tools and stood, wiping his hands on a rag. That's Richard's way. He doesn't just want to win, he wants to make sure his opponents can never recover. I have to warn them, your phone calls are being monitored. Richard had the house system upgraded last week. Diego pulled out a burner phone from his jacket pocket. Use this. But Isabella, even if you warn them, there's nothing they can do. Richard owns the inspectors, the health department, probably half the city council. Isabella took the phone with shaking hands. Then what was the point of any of this? Why did I sacrifice everything if I couldn't save them? Because you didn't know who you were dealing with. Diego stepped closer, close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes. But now you do. The question is, what are you going to do about it? Run away with you? The words slipped out before Isabella could stop them. That's what you suggested last night. I meant it. Diego's hand cupped her face, his thumb tracing her cheekbone. I have money Richard doesn't know about, contacts who can create new identities. We could be gone by tonight. And then what? Hide for the rest of our lives. Isabella leaned into his touch despite herself. What kind of life is that? A life where we're free to choose our own mistakes instead of living with his. The sound of a car engine made them both freeze. Through the garden's archway, Isabella could see Whack Mercedes pulling up the circular drive. He was back early. Go, Diego said urgently. Get back to your room. I'll say I was alone out here. But Isabella didn't move. Instead, she reached up and pulled Diego's face down to hers, pressing her lips against his in a kiss that was desperate and doomed, and absolutely inevitable. For a moment, Diego assisted, then his arms came around her, holding her against him as if he could shield her from everything that was coming. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Isabella saw her own desperation reflected in Diego's eyes. I can't keep pretending to be his wife, she whispered. You have to, at least until we can figure out a way to get you out safely. And if there is no safe way out, Diego's expression hardened with resolve, then I guess we'll have to make one. As Isabella slipped back into the house through the kitchen entrance, she didn't see Richard watching from his study window. His phone pressed to his ear as he spoke in low, urgent tones to someone who clearly understood that the Blackwood family's newest problem needed to be handled with extra me-produced detective. Sarah Chen had seen enough crime scenes to know when something didn't add up. The Mendoza family restaurant fire had been ruled accidental faulty wiring in the basement, but the burn patterns were wrong, the accelerant traces too convenient, and the timing too perfect. 3 days after Isabella Mendoza's wedding to Richard Blackwood, her family's restaurant burned to the ground. Coincidence? Sarah didn't believe in coincidences, especially when they involved the Blackwood family. She'd been tracking Richard Blackwood for 2 years. Ever since his second wife's accident, Maria Santos had been working with the FBI as an informant, gathering evidence about Richard's money laundering operation. 2 weeks before she was supposed to testify, her car went off a cliff on a rainy night. The brake lines had been cut, but the evidence was ruled inadmissible due to contamination at Thessany. Now, there was a third wife, and Sarah was determined this one wouldn't end up as another convenient. The problem was proving anything. Richard Blackwood was careful, protected by layers of legitimate boastness and political connections. His lawyers were the best money could buy, and witnesses had a habit of disappearing or suddenly losing their memory, but everyone had weaknesses. And Sarah was betting that Richard's weakness was his need to control everything and everyone in his orbit. That kind of obsessive control left traces: surveillance equipment, financial records, patterns of behavior that could be predicted and exploited. She just needed someone on the inside who could get her the evidence she needed. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Meet me at Pier 39, noon tomorrow. Come alone. I have information about Richard Blackwood." Sarah stared at the message. In 2 years of investigation, no one had ever volunteered information about Richard. People were too scared, too smart, or too dead to talk, which meant either this was a trap, or someone had finally gotten desperate enough to risk everything. Diego stood at the end of Pier 39, watching tourists feed the sea lions while his mind churned with possibilities and dangers. Detective Chen was late, but that was probably smart. Anyone could be watching, and Richard's paranoia had been escalating since the wedding. "You're Diego Blackwood." He turned to find an Asian woman in her 30s, professionally dressed but with eyes that had seen too much. Detective Sarah Chen looked exactly like he'd expected: tough, intelligent, and completely unafraid of the risks she was taking. "You're the cop who's been investigating my brother." Among other things, Sarah moved to stand beside him at the railing, both of them maintaining the casual posture of tourists enjoying the view. "Why did you contact me?" "Because Richard's going to kill Isabella." Diego's bluntness made Sarah's eyes narrow. "Maybe not today, maybe not next week, but he will. And I can't let that happen." "Why? What makes this wife different from the others?" Diego was quiet for a long moment, watching a sailboat navigate between the sea lions and the tourist boats. How could he explain that Isabella was different because she made him want to be different? That for the first time in his life he'd met someone worth fighting for instead of running from. "Because this time, I'm not going to stand by and watch," he said finally. "What do you know about Richard's business operations?" "Enough to put him away for life, if I can get the evidence to you safely." Diego pulled out a USB drive, bank records, communication logs, surveillance footage from the house, everything I could compile over the past 3 months. Sarah took the drive, slipping it into her jacket pocket. "Why now? Why not 2 years ago when Maria was killed?" "Because 2 years ago I was a coward who only cared about saving himself." Diego's voice carried bitter. "I knew what Richard was, but I told myself it wasn't my problem. I was wrong, and now I'm in love with his wife, and she's going to die if I don't do something about it." Sarah studied his face, looking for deception or hidden motives. "That's a dangerous confession to Mikado, a police officer. It's not a crime to fall in love. Acting on it might be, but loving someone, that's just the one honest thing I've done in years." "Does Isabella feel the same way?" Diego thought about the kiss in the garden, the way Isabella had looked at him, like he was her lifeline in a storm. "I think so, but it doesn't matter. Richard will kill us both if he finds out. Then we'd better make sure he doesn't get the chance." Sarah turned to face him fully. "I'm going to need more than files. Diego, I need someone who can testify about what they've witnessed firsthand. I can't. Richard may be a psychopath, but he's still family. I won't testify against him, even to save Isabella." The question hit Diego like a physical blow. His family loyalty, as twisted and dysfunctional as it was, warred with his need to protect the woman he loved. "There has to be another way." "There is," Sarah said quietly. "But you're not going to like it." "What do you mean?" "Isabella would have to testify. She'd have to tell a jury everything she's witnessed, everything she knows about Richard's operations." Sarah's expression was grim, and that would make her the most dangerous person in Richard's world. Diego felt the blood drain from his face. He'd never let her leave alive. Not if he knew she was cooperating with us. But if we could get her into witness protection. Richard has connections everywhere. Political contacts, judges, law enforcement. Witness protection will keep her safe. "Then what do you suggest?" Diego stared out at the bay, his mind racing through possibilities, each one more dangerous than the last. "We make Richard think Isabella is dead." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "Fake her death. It's the only way. If Richard believes she's gone, he'll stop hunting her. We could stage an accident, something believable, ... And then what? Isabella spends the rest of her life in hiding. Better than spending it in a coffin." Sarah was quiet for a moment, considering the implications. "It could work, but we'd need Isabella's cooperation. And Diego, if we do this, there's no going back. You'd never be able to see her again." As far as the world is concerned, she'd be dead. Diego closed his eyes against the pain of that reality. I know. Are you prepared for that? I'm prepared to do whatever it takes to keep her alive. Diego's voice was steady, but Sarah could see the cost of the decision in his eyes, even if it means losing her forever. There's one more thing, Sarah said. For this to work, Richard can never suspect you were involved. You'd have to play the grieving brother-in-law convincingly. I'll manage. Sarah handed him a business card with only a phone number on it. Think about this carefully. Once we set this in motion, there's no stopping it. And if something goes wrong, ... double quotes, I understand the risks. Do you? Because if Richard finds out what we're planning, Isabella won't be the only one who ends up dead. Diego pocketed the card. Detective Chen, how long has Richard been killing people? Sarah's expression darkened. I think he started with your father. The revelation hit Diego like a sledgehammer. Your father's heart attack 12 years ago. The autopsy showed traces of a rare toxin that mimicked cardiac arrest. Was barely detectable with the technology available then, but new testing methods spec'd it up. Sarah watched Diego's face crumble as the implications sank in. Richard didn't just inherit family business. Diego, he murdered his way to the top. As Sarah walked away, leaving Diego alone with the shattering knowledge that his brother was even more monstrous than he'd imagined. She didn't see the figure watching from the shadows of a nearby building. Richard Blackwood had followed his brother to the pier, and he'd seen enough to know that Diego had just signed both their death warrants. Isabella stood in front of the bathroom mirror, practicing her smile. It had been a week since their restaurant fire, and she'd played the role of the grieving but supportive wife to perfection. Richard had been solicitous and understanding, bringing her flowers and expensive gifts to cheer her up, while her family's dreams literally went up in smoke. The irony wasn't lost on her. She was grieving for her family's loss, for her own naivety, for the life she'd thought she was going to have, but she was also planning, and that gave her something Richard's previous wives had probably never had. Hope. Darling, are you ready? Richard's voice called from the bedroom. The charity gala starts in an hour. Isabella adjusted the emerald necklace. Richard had insisted she wear a Blackwood family heirloom that felt more like a chain than jewelry. Almost finished. Tonight was important. Richard was being honored by the San Francisco Children's Hospital for his generous contributions to pediatric care. It was exactly the kind of public appearance that reinforced his image as a pillar of the community, while his real business continued in the shadows. But it was also an opportunity. Diego had mentioned that tonight would be perfect for what they were planning, though he'd been frustratingly vague about the details. All Isabella knew was that by tomorrow morning Richard would believe she was dead, and she would be free. The price of that freedom, never seeing Diego again, was almost too painful to contemplate. But Paterto loved someone from a distance than to be trapped in a cage with a monster. You look beautiful, Richard said as she emerged from the bathroom. His eyes traveled over her appreciatively, and Isabella had to suppress a shudder. The emeralds suit you. They're gorgeous. Is there a story behind them? My mother wore them to her first charity gala with my father. It was the night she realized she'd marry a Dento San Francisco royalty. Richard's smile held an edge. She said they brought her luck. Isabella wondered if Richard's mother would have considered being married to a murderer lucky. But she kept that thought to herself. I hope they bring me luck too. Oh, I think your luck is already established, don't you? After all, you married me. The drive to the gala was a study in contrasts. Outside the limousine windows, San Francisco glittered like a jewelry box, beautiful and bright and full of promise. Inside, Isabella sat beside a man who had orchestrated the destruction of everything she'd ever cared about, while he discussed seating arrangements and donation targets as if he were a normal human being. Blow. He followed me to the pier yesterday when I met with Detective Chen. He knows I'm working with the police. Isabella's world tilted. Then we have to leave now. Tonight. Before what? Before he kills us both. Diego's laugh held no humor. Isabella, Richard's not going to let either of us walk away from this. The plan's changed. What do you mean? Diego pulled out a small device that looked like a USB drive. This contains everything: bank records, communication logs, video surveillance from the house. It's enough to put Richard away for life. Give it to Detective Chen. I can't. Richard's watching me too closely now. Diego pressed the device into Isabella's palm. You have vetoed. Do it. Isabella stared at the small piece of technology that contained Richard's destruction. If I do this, he'll know I betrayed him. He already suspects. Isabella, Richard's planning something for tonight. I overheard him on the phone this morning talking about solving the Diego problem permanently. Diego's hands framed her face. He's going to have me killed, probably during the drive home. Make it look like an accident. Then don't go home with us. Leave now, disappear, and leave you alone with him. Never. Diego's thumb traced her cheekbone. But if you give fate evidence to Detective Chen, Richard won't be going home tonight either. Isabella understood what he was saying. Richard would be arrested at the gala, in front of all his sociate friends and political connections. The humiliation would be as devastating as the criminal charges. What about witness protection? Detective Chen said. There is no witness protection that can hide us from Richard's connections. But if he's in federal prison, Diego's smile was grim. Even Richard Blackwood can't buy his way out of a Supermax facility. The bathroom door opened, and both of them froze as an elderly woman entered, chattering on her phone about seating arrangements. Diego slipped back into the stall, and Isabella pretended to touch up a lipstick. When they were alone again, Diego emerged and pulled Isabella into his arms. Whatever happens tonight, I need you to know something. Diego, I love you. The words hung between them, simple and devastating and absolutely true. I know it's impossible. I know the timing is insane, but I love you. Isabella felt tears threaten. I love you too. Their kiss was desperate and gentle and final all at once. When they broke apart, Isabella could see her own heartbreak reflected in Diego's eyes. Go, Diego whispered. Find Detective Chen, give her the evidence, and let her handle the rest. What about you? I'll be fine. Richard won't try anything in a room full of witnesses. Diego's attempt at reassurance fell flat. Just, be careful, Isabella. Richard's most dangerous when he's cornered. As Isabella left the bathroom, the USB doctor burning in her purse like a brand. She didn't see Diego pull out his phone and dial a number he'd memorized but hoped never to use. Detective Chen, it's Diego Blackwood. We need to move tonight. Richard knows everything. Detective Sarah Chen adjusted the serving tray in her hands and moved through the ballroom with the practiced invisibility of catering staff. Getting into the gala had been easier than expected. A few phone calls, a uniform borrowed from the real caterers, and suddenly she was just another face in the army of workers, making sure San Francisco's elite had their champagne glasses full, and their conscience clear. She'd been watching Richard Blackwood for 20 minutes, noting his interactions, his body language, the way he kept checking his phone as if waiting for confirmation of something important. When Isabella Blackwood approached the bar near where Sarah was arranging appetizers, Sarah made her move. Mrs. Blackwood, Sarah kept her voice low. I'm Detective Chen. Diego sent me. Isabella's face went pale, but to her credit she didn't react visibly. I have something for you. The USB drive passed between them as smoothly as a practiced magic trick. Isabella pretending to select a canap while Sarah palmed the evidence that would finally bring down Richard Blackwood. My team is in position, Sarah whispered. The moment I verify this data, we'll move in. Stay close to public areas and away from Richard until then. Isabella nodded almost imperceptibly, then moved away from the bar with the grace of someone who hadn't just potentially signed her husband's arrest warrant. Sarah slipped into a service corridor and connected the USB drive to her encrypted laptop. What she found made her blood run cold. Bank transfers totaling hundreds of millions of dollars, communication logs detailing murders, extortion, and political corruption at the highest levels, and most damning of all, video surveillance from inside the Blackwood mansion showing Richard personally orchestrating thefts of his previous wives. The evidence was overwhelming, but as Sarah began transmitting it to FBI headquarters, she noticed something that made her stomach drop. The metadata showed the files had been accessed less than an hour ago. Richard knew exactly what was on this drive, which meant Isabella was walking into a trap. The ballroom had transformed into a glittering stage for San Francisco's most powerful players, but Isabella felt like she was watching a play where everyone knew their lines except her. Richard moved through the crowd with practiced charm, accepting congratulations and making small talk, but she could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his eyes constantly scanned the room. He was hunting. Ladies and gentlemen, the master of ceremonies announced, please join us for the traditional first dance as we honor tonight's distinguished guest. Richard appeared at Isabella's side as if summoned by magic, his smile perfect for the cameras that would capture this moment for tomorrow's society pages. Shall we, darling? Isabella's blood turned to ice as Richard led her onto the dance floor. His grip on her hand was firm to ferment when he pulled her into his arms for the waltz. She could feel the rigid control in every movement. Nervous, sweetheart, Richard murmured as they began to move. Is something troubling you? Just overwhelmed by all this attention? Isabella forced herself to smile for the watching crowd. It's been a difficult week. Yes, your family's little fire was quite tragic. Richard's voice carried a satisfaction that made Isabella's skin crawl. But sometimes destruction is necessary for renewal, don't you think? Around them, other couples joined the dance, but Isabella felt isolated in Richard's arms, trapped in a slow-motion nightmare where every step brought her closer to danger. I received some interesting news today, Richard continued conversationally. It seems my brother has been quite busy lately, meeting with police officers, compiling files, making plans. Isabella's heart hammered against her ribs, but she kept her expression neutral. Diego's always been rebellious, yes, but I never thought he was stupid. Richard's grip tightened painfully. Did you know that betrayal was punishable by death in medieval times? Family betrayal, especially. Richard, you're hurting me, am I? His smile never wavered, but his eyes had gone cold and reptilian. How careless of me. But then, pain is often necessary for learning, don't you think? The music swelled around them, violins and cellos creating a romantic soundtrack for what Isabella realized might be her final dance. She could see Diego across the room, his face a mask of barrel-like controlled fear as he watched Richard hold her too tightly, speak too intimately into her ear. "Where is it, Isabella?" The question was so quiet she almost missed it. "Where is what?" "The USB drive Diego gave you. The one containing files that don't belong to him." Richard's voice remained conversational, but Isabella could feel the violence coiled beneath his civilized surface. "I know you have it." Isabella's mind raced. If Richard knew about the drive, then he knew she'd given it to Detective Chen, which meant, "The detective you gave it to isn't really a detective," Richard whispered, confirming her worst fears. "Agent Martinez has been working for me for quite some time. Very useful to have federal law enforcement on the payroll." Isabella felt the world spinning away from her. If Detective Chen was compromised, then everything evidence a plan. Diego's safety was already lost. "Don't look so devastated, darling. You've simply learned an important lesson about trust." Richard guided her through a turn that brought them closer to the ballroom's exit. "Now, we're going to walk out of here together, smiling for all our friends. You're going to get in the car with me, and we're going to go home and discuss your future. And if I refuse..." Richard's hand moved to her back, and Isabella felt something small and sharp press against her spinner through the thin fabric of her dress. "Then Diego dies right here, right now. I have 3 men in this room, Isabella. They're very good at making deaths look accidental." Isabella's gaze found Diego across the dance floor, and she saw the exact moment he realized something was wrong. His face went rigid with alarm, and he started moving toward them. "Don't," Richard warned. "One signal from me, and he'll never reach us alive." The music came to an end, and polite applause filled the ballroom. Richard stepped back and offered his arm with perfect gentleman's courtesy, but the pressure against her spine never lessened. "Smile, darling, we have an audience." Isabella pasted on a bright smile and took Richard's arm, knowing that every step toward the exit might be her last. As they moved through the crowd, accepting congratulations and well wishes, she desperately tried to think of a way out. That's when she saw him. Detective Chunda, real Detective Chunda, was standing near the service entrance, dressed as a waiter but clearly scanning the room with professional intensity. Isabella's eyes met his across the ballroom, and sure understanding flash in his expression. Richard's fake detective hadn't replaced the real one. Sarah Chen was still here, still working, still dangerous to Richard's plans, which meant there might still be hope. Sarah Chen had been a detective for 15 years, and she'd learned to trust her instincts above everything else. Right now, those instincts were screaming that something was very wrong with the scene playing out in front of her. Isabella Blackwood looked like a woman walking to her execution. Despite the smile plastered on her face, Richard's grip on her arm was possessive and controlling, and when Sarah noticed the subtle way Isabella's dress pulled tight across her back, she realized Richard was pressing something against his wife's spine. Sarah had seen enough domestic violence cases to recognize the signs of coercive control, but this was something more sinister. This was a predator who'd been cornered and was now extremely dangerous. She activated the microphone hidden in her collar. "All units, we have a possible hostage situation. Target is moving toward the main exit with the subject. Be ready to move." On my signal, Sarah began working her way through the crowd, using her service disguise to get closer to the couple. As she moved, she noticed other things that made her blood run cold. 3 men positioned strategically all through the ballroom, all of them watching Richard and Isabella with professional attention, all of them with their hands positioned near concealed weapons. This wasn't just an extraction, this was an execution waiting to happen. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text message. "Detective Chen compromised. Trust no one." Did he? Somehow Richard's brother had figured out that there was more than one player in this game. Sarah looked across the room and spotted Diego near the band, his face rigid with controlled panic as Hugh watched his brother escort Isabella toward the exit. Sarah made a split-second decision that would either save lives or end her career. She pulled the fire alarm. The shriek of the alarm system sent the ballroom into immediate chaos. Wealthy donors began moving toward exits with the efficiency of people accustomed to having their safety managed by security guards appeared from nowhere, directing traffic and maintaining order. In the confusion, Sarah saw Isabella break free from Richard's grip. The fire alarm shattered the elegant atmosphere of the charity gala, like a brick through stained glass. Isabella felt Richard's grip loosen for just a moment as he instinctively looked around for the source of the emergency, and she took her chance. She drove her elbow back into Richard's solar plexus with all the force she could muster, then twisted away from him as he doubled over in pain and surprise. The knife, because that's what had been pressed against her, to the marble floor. "Isabella!" Diego's voice cut through the chaos as he fought his way through the panicking crowd. She ran toward him, her heels clicking against the marble, her emerald dress a bright target in the sea of black tuxedos. Behind her she could hear Richard shouting orders to his men, his cultured facade cracking to reveal the monster beneath. Diego caught her in his arms, pulling her against his chest as if he could shield her from everything with his body. "Are you hurt?" "No, but Richard knows everything. About the USB drive, about Detective Chen. I know. We have to get out of here now. Around them, the ballroom continued its descent into controlled chaos as security guards herded guests the exits. But Isabella noticed that some of the security guards were watching her and Diego with more than professional interest. This way, Diego said, pulling her toward a service exit that led to the hotel's kitchen. They pushed through swinging doors into a world of stainless steel and controlled chaos as catering staff dealt with the sudden evacuation. None of the kitchen workers paid attention to the elegantly dressed couple weaving between prep stations and dishwashers. Where are we going? Isabella asked as Diego led her through a maze of corridors. Service elevator to the parking garage. I have a car waiting. The elevator doors opened to reveal Detective Sarah Chen, still dressed as a server but now clearly armed. Get in, she ordered. How do we know you're really? Diego started. Because if I were working for Richard, you'd both be dead already. Sarah's logic was unassailable. Now get in before his men figure out where you went. The elevator descended in tense silence. Isabella found herself pressed between Diego and Sarah, hyper-aware of the guns both of them were carrying, of the danger, closing in from all sides. The evidence on the USB drive, Isabella said. Is it enough? More than enough, Sarah replied. But first we have to keep you alive long enough to testify. The elevator opened onto the hotel's underground parking garage. Sarah led them to a nondescription that looked like it had seen better decades but probably had an engine that could outrun most Polaris cruisers. Get in the back, Sarah ordered. Stay down, and whatever happens, don't get out of the car. As they pulled out of the garage, Isabella saw the first of Richard's men entering the parking area. The man's eyes swept over their car without recognition, but Isabella knew it was only a matter of time before Richard realized they'd escaped the hotel. Where are we going? Diego asked. Safe house, Sarah replied tersely. FBI facility in Oakland. Once we get there, we can. The rear window exploded in a shower of safety glass as a bullet punched through the car. Sarah cursed and floored the accelerator, sending the sedan screaming up the parking garage's exit ramp. They found us, Isabella whispered unnecessarily. In the side mirror, she could see a black SUV in pursuit, gaining on them as Sarah navigated the narrow confines of the garage. More gunshots rang out, sparking off the concrete walls and shattering. Overhead lights, they burst out of the garage onto the street in a shower of sparks and burning rubber. Sarah's sedan fishtailing as she fought for control. The SUV followed, its driver clearly more skilled and certainly better armed than they were. Hold on, Sarah shouted, yanking the wheel hard to the right. They careened down a side street, tires screaming in protest. Isabella found herself thrown against Diego, his arms automatically coming around her to cushion the impact. Even in mortal danger, even with bullets flying around them, she felt safer in his embrace than she had since the moment she'd said I do to Richard. Sarah, Diego said, urgently. They're trying to box us in. Isabella looked back to see two more black SUVs converging on their position from parallel streets. Richard had apparently called in every resource he had to end this chase. I know, Sarah replied grimly, which is why we're not running anymore. She yanked the wheel hard to the left, sending their car skidding sideways into an alley that looked barely wide enough for a bicycle, much less a full-sized sedan. The alley opened onto a wider street, and suddenly Isabella could see flashing lights. Ahead, police cars, FBI vehicles, what looked like half the law enforcement in Northern California converging on their position. You called for backup, Diego said, and Isabella could hear the relief in his voice. The moment I pulled the fire alarm, Sarah confirmed. Richard Blackwood's been a target of a joint FBI-D task force for 2 years. We've been waiting for enough evidence to move on him. They pulled into the middle of what looked like a small army of federal agents, all of them armed and clearly ready for a fight. As Isabella and Diego climbed out of the bullet-riddled sedan, Sarah was already coordinating with the task force leader, pointing back toward the hotel and speaking in the rapid-fire shorthand of law enforcement professionals. Is it over? Isabella asked Diego. Before he could answer, Sarah approached them, her expression grim. We've got Richard's men in custody. But Richard himself escaped in the confusion at the hotel. Isabella felt her heart sink. So he's still out there. He's wounded and alone, with every law enforcement agency in California looking for him, Sarah said. But until we have him in custody, I'm still in danger, Isabella finished. You both are, Sarah confirmed. Richard Blackwood doesn't forgive, and he doesn't forget. Even if we catch him tomorrow, he has connections who might continue his vendetta. Diego's jaw tightened with resolve. Then what do you suggest? Sarah looked between them, clearly weighing options and risks. Witness protection. New identities, new lives, somewhere Richard's people will never find you. Together, Isabella asked if that's what you want. Isabella looked at Diego, seeing her own hope and fear reflected in his eyes. They could have a life together, but it would mean giving up everything they'd ever known: family, friends, history, identity itself. Yes, she said without hesitation. Together. Diego's smile was answer enough, but as federal agents led them toward armored vehicles that would take them to safety, None of them saw the figure watching from a distant rooftop. Richard Blackwood's face twisted with rage and the premise of vengeance. He might have lost this battle, but the war was far from over. The FBI safe house in Oakland looked exactly like what it was, a fortress disguised as a suburban ranch home, bulletproof windows, reinforced doors, and enough surveillance equipment to monitor a small city, all hidden behind beige siding and a white picket fence that screamed absolutely nothing interesting happening here. Isabella sat on the couch in the living room, still wearing her emerald gown from the gala, feeling like she was trapped in someone else's nightmare. 6 hours ago she'd been playing the role of the perfect society wife. Now she was a protected witness whose husband wanted her dead. The task force raided the Blackwood mansion 2 hours ago, Sarah said, entering the room with a cup of coffee that smelled like salvation. We found enough evidence to put Richard away for life, assuming can catch him any leads on where he might have gone. Diego asked. He'd traded his tuxedo for jeans and a t-shirt provided by the FBI, but he still looked elegant and dangerous. His private jet is missing, along with approximately $50 million from various offshore accounts. Sarah's expression was grim. Richard Blackwood has the resources to disappear permanently if Hecus is too. Isabella wrapped her hands around the coffee mug, grateful for its warmth. But he won't choose Totosapia, will he? He'll come after us, probably, Sarah admitted. Richard's psychological profile suggests he sees this as a personal betrayal that requires personal vengeance. Running away would be admitting defeat. So what's the plan? Diego moved to sit beside Isabella on the couch, close enough that she could feel his body heat, his solid presence anchoring her in the chaos. Tomorrow, we start the process of creating new identities for both of you. New names, backgrounds, documentation, everything you need to disappear completely. Sarah consulted her tablet. The U.S. Marshals Service will handle the actual relocation. But for tonight, you're safe here. Safe? Isabella almost laughed at the concept. She'd thought she was safe when she married Richard, thought she was gaining security and stability. Instead, she'd walked into a nightmare that had nearly cost her everything. I need to call my parents, Isabella said suddenly. They think I'm dead, don't they? The fire at their restaurant. Now your parents are in protective custody, Sarah said gently. We moved them this afternoon when we realized Richard might use them as leverage against you. Are they safe? Safer than they've been since the day Richard decided to target your family. Sarah's voice carried conviction. Isabella, your father's gambling debts. They were all held by companies Richard controlled. He was planning to use them to keep you compliant indefinitely. Isabella felt sick. My father never gambled. Richard forced him into it somehow. Blackmail, most likely. We found photos in Richard's files that suggest your father was set up in a compromising situation, then offered gambling as a way to solve his problems. Sarah's expression darkened. Richard's very good at creating the exact crisis he wants to solve. Diego's hand found Isabella's, interlacing their fingers. Your family will be okay. The FBI will make sure of that, but I'll never see them again, will I? Isabella's voice cracked on the question. If Diego and I disappearing to witness protection, you might, Sarah said carefully. Someday, after Richard is captured and his organization is completely dismantled. But that could take years. Years of hiding. Years of looking over their shoulders. Of never being completely sure they were safe. Isabella thought about her sister's upcoming wedding. Her parents' anniversary next month. All the family moments she would miss. But then she looked at Diego, saw the love and determination in his eyes, and realized that some price were worth paying. There's something else, Sarah continued. The evidence we found suggests Richard has been planning to eliminate both of you for weeks. He never intended to let either of you live long term. What do you mean? Diego's voice was sharp. Your brother took out a $10 million life insurance policy on Isabella 3 days after their wedding. He also increased security around the mansion and had new wills drawn up that leave everything to a shell company he controls. Sarah's tablet displayed financial documents that painted a chilling picture. He was planning to make Isabella's death look like a robbery gone wrong. Probably within the next month. Isabella felt the blood drain from her face. And Diego, accidental overdose. Richard's been slowly increasing the purity of the cocaine he's been supplying to Diego through intermediaries. One more increase would have been lethal. Diego stared at Sarah in shock. I don't use cocaine. No, but Richard's been having it put in your drinks at clubs, in food delivered to your apartment. Small amounts, just enough to build up a tolerance, and create a paper trail of drug use. Sarah's expression was sympathetic. He's been planning your death for months, Diego, making it look like the inevitable end of a self-destructive lifestyle. The room fell silent as the full scope of Richard's planning became clear. He hadn't just been willing to kill them, he'd been methodically orchestrating their deaths with the same attention to detail he brought to his business ventures. Jesus, Diego whispered. My own brother. Isabella squeezed his hand. He's not your brother anymore. Brothers don't do things like this. No, Diego agreed, his voice hardening with resolve. They don't. Sarah stood up, closing her tablet. I'll let you two get some rest. Tomorrow's going to be a long day, after briefings and paperwork. But tonight, try to sleep. You're safe here. After Sarah left, Isabella and Diego sat in silence, processing the magnitude of their situation. Finally, Diego spoke. Do you regret it, marrying him? I mean, Isabella considered the question seriously. If I hadn't married Richard, I never would have met you. And your family's restaurant would still be standing, would it? Or would Richard have just found another way to destroy it? Isabella turned to face Diego. You said it yourself, Richard doesn't make impulsive decisions. If you wanted our restaurant gone, it was going to be gone regardless. Diego's thumb traced patterns on the back of her hand. I'm sorry for all of it. For not stopping him sooner. For not protecting you better. ... You saved my life, Isabella interrupted. If you hadn't figured out what Richard was planning, I'd be dead within the month. We both would. They sat quietly for a moment, contemplating how close they'd come to Richard's final solution. Then Isabella spoke again. Diego, when we get new identities tomorrow... What kind of life do you want? Diego's smile was soft and genuine, the first truly happy expression she'd seen from him since they met. Whatever kind of life includes you. Isabella leaned against him, feeling safe for the first time in weeks. Outside, federal agents maintained Thea watch, and somewhere in the darkness, Richard Blackwood was planning his revenge. But in this moment, in this room, Isabella and Diego had something Richard could never understand or destroy. They had each other, and they had chosen their love over safety, over family loyalty, over everything else that had once seemed important. It would have to be enough to carry them through whatever came. Next, Richard Blackwood stood in the bathroom of a dingy motel room outside Reno, staring at his reflection in the cracked mirror. The man looking back at him bore little resemblance to the polished society Figaro had been honored at a charity gala 12 hours earlier. His tuxedo was torn and bloodstained, his usually perfect hair disheveled, and there was a wild look in his eyes that spoke of a man who had lost of everything and was rapidly losing his sanity. He'd underestimated his brother. After years of dismissing Diego as a weak-willed disappointment, Richard had failed to anticipate that love might transform his sibling into something dangerous. It was a mistake he wouldn't make again. His phone buzzed with an encrypted message from one of his few remaining loyal contacts. FBI rated our properties accounts frozen. Organization scattered. Recommend immediate extraction to non-extradition country. Richard deleted the message and threw the phone against the bathroom wall, watching it shatter with savage satisfaction. Running away wasn't an option. His entire identity was built on control, on being the apex predator in every situation. If he fled now, he would spend the rest of his life looking over his shoulder, diminished and afraid. No. Better to end this properly, to tie up the loose ends that had brought him to this point. Diego and Isabella thought they were safe in FBI protection. But Richard had been planning for contingencies long before they'd ever met. He pulled out a second phone. This one connected to resources the FBI didn't know existed. The call was, on the first ring, Sir Marcus, I need you to activate Protocol 7. There was a pause. Marcus had been with Richard for 8 years, had helped orchestrate the deaths of Bethelene and Maria, but even he seemed hesitant about Protocol 7. Sir, that's extremely high risk. If anything goes wrong, everything has already gone wrong, Richard snarled. My brother and that bitch he's infatuated with have destroyed everything I've built. Protocol 7 is the only way to salvage this situation. Understood. How long do you need? Richard looked at his watch. 72 hours after that, it won't matter anymore. He ended the call and turned back to the mirror. Protocol 7 was his nuclear option, a plan so ruthless and comprehensive that it would either restore his control completely or burn everything to the ground in the attempt. Isabella and Diego thought their love story was going to have a happy ending. Richard was about to remind them that he was the one who wrote the endings in this family. The U.S. Marshal's office in Oakland looked like every other government building Isabella had ever been. Fluorescent lights, beige walls, and the perpetual smell of burnt coffee and bureaucratic resignation. She sat across from Deputy Marshal Janet Rodriguez. Watching the woman shuffle through documents that would transform Isabella Mendoza Blackwood into someone else entirely. Sarah Mitchell, Marshal Rodriguez said, sliding a driver's license across the desk. Born in Portland, Oregon. Marketing consultant. No family, few friends, generally forgettable. Sarah picked up the license and stared at the photo they'd taken that morning. She looked pale and hollow-eyed, like a ghost of herself. How long will I have to be Sarah Mitchell? That depends on how long it takes us to capture Richard Blackwood and dismantle his organization. Rodriguez replied, could be months, could be years. The important thing is that Sarah Mitchell will be safe in ways that Isabella Blackwood never could be. Diego was undergoing the same transformation. In the next room, becoming David Santos, a freelance photographer from Denver. They'd chosen complementary cover stories. Sarah and David had met online, fallen in love, and decided to start fresh together in a small town where nobody knew their history. It was almost romantic, if you ignored the fact that their romance had been born from murder, betrayal, and the destruction of everything they'd once held dear. Where will we be relocated? Isabella asked. Better if you don't know until we're ready to move you, Rodriguez said. But I can tell you it'll be somewhere quiet, somewhere Richard's people aren't likely to look. After the briefing, Isabella met Diego in the hallway. He looked as disoriented as she felt, holding his own collection of identity documents like they might explode at any moment. David Santos, he said with a rueful smile. Apparently I'm really into nature photography. Sarah Mitchell, marketing consultant. Isabella held up her driver's license. We're very ordinary people. Think we can pull it off? Before Isabella that could answer, Marshall Rodriguez appeared beside them. We need to move you to a new location immediately, she said urgently. We've intercepted communications suggesting Richard may have located this facility. Isabella's blood ran cold. How is that possible? We're still investigating. But right now our priority is getting you both somewhere safe. Rodriguez toward an exit where black SUVs were waiting. We'll brief you on the new location once we're mobile. As they hurried toward the vehicles, Isabella caught Diego's hand. This is never going to end, is it? It will, Diego said with more conviction than she felt. Richard's made too many enemies, burned too many bridges. Eventually, someone will take him down. And if they don't, Diego's jaw tightened. Then we'll figure out how to do it ourselves. The convoy of SUVs pulled away from the federal building just as explosions rocked the structure they'd left behind. Through the rear window, Isabella watched flames engulf the building where they'd been creating new identities. Just minutes before Richard had found them again. The small mountain town of Cedar Falls, Montana had a population of 1,247 and three main industries: logging, hunting, guides, and trying not to ask too many questions about the city folks who occasionally showed up looking for places to disappear. It was the perfect place for Sarah Mitchell and David Santos to start their new life. Isabella stood on the porch of their rented cabin, breathing mountain air that tasted like pine trees and possibilities. For 2 weeks they'd lived as Sarah and David, shopping for groceries in town, hiking mountain trails, and slowly learning to be normal people who weren't constantly looking over their shoulders. It was the closest thing to happiness Isabella had experienced in months. Coffee's ready, Diego called from inside the cabin. Isabella smiled and turned to go inside, but movement in the tree line caught her eye. For just a moment she thought she saw sunlight glinting off something metallic, binoculars maybe, or a rifle scope. But when she looked again, there was nothing there. Did you see something? Diego asked, appearing in the doorway with 2 mugs of coffee. I thought, probably just a deer. Isabella accepted the coffee gratefully, using its warmth to chase away the sudden chill. This place makes me paranoid, too quiet after the city. Diego wrapped his arms around her from behind, his chin resting on the top of her head. Maybe quiet is what we need. They stood together on the porch, watching the sun rise over the mountains, and Isabella allowed herself to believe that they might actually have a future, that love might be enough to overcome the nightmare that had brought them. Together she was so focused on the peaceful moment that she didn't notice the small red light blinking on the device that had been planted under the porch railing, or the way it started blinking faster as her heart rate increased. Richard had been watching them for 3 days, learning their routines, mapping their defenses, planning his approach. Protocol 7 required perfect timing, and he was finally ready to make his move. The landline in their cabin rang at exactly 3:17 a.m., the sound cutting through the mountain silence like acne. Isabella jerked awake, immediately alert in the way that people who've lived with danger learn. Diego was already reaching for the phone, but Isabella caught his wrist. Nobody knows this number except the FBI. They stared at the phone as it continued ringing, each shrill note more ominous than the last. Finally it stopped, leaving them in darkness that now felt oppressive rather than peaceful. Could be a wrong number, Diego said, but his voice carried no conviction. The phone began ringing again. This time Diego answered. Hello. Isabella watched his face go white as he listened to whatever was being said on the other end. After a moment he hung up, without speaking. What is it? She asked, though she already knew the answer would change everything. That was Richard. Diego's voice was hollow. He says he has your parents. Isabella felt the world tilt beneath her feet. That's impossible. They're in protective custody. Diego handed her a photograph that had been slipped under their door while they slept. It showed her parents bound and gagged in what looked like a warehouse, her father's face bruised, her mother's eyes wide with terror. He wants us to meet him at the old mining facility up on Black Mountain, Diego said alone. No FBI, no backup. If we bring anyone else, he'll kill your parents and disappear again. Isabella stared at the photograph, her hands shaking. How did he find them? How did he find us? I don't know, but it doesn't matter now. Diego was already moving, pulling on clothes with rapid efficiency. We have to go. This is a trap. Of course it's a trap. Diego's voice was grim. But we're going. Anyway, because Richard knows we won't sacrifice your parents to save ourselves. Isabella closed her eyes, thinking through their options. Call the FBI and risk her parents' lives. Go to the meeting and almost certainly die. Stay here and live with the knowledge that their cowardice had killed 2 innocent people. There's a 4th option, she said slowly. What? We go to the meeting, but we don't go alone. Isabella looked at Diego with a mixture of fear and determination. We call Detective Chen, tell her what's happening, but have her and her team stay back until we can get my parents to safety, and then we end this, one way or another. Diego cupped her face in his hands. Isabella, if we do this ... I know. She leaned into his touch. But running isn't living, Diego. If we spend the rest of our lives hiding from Richard, he wins anyway. They called Detective Chen from the burner phone the FBI had given them for emergencies. Her response was exactly what they expected: professional, concern, strategic thinking, and absolute insistence that they wait for backup. Give us 2 hours, Chen said. We can have a tactical team in position. We don't have 2 hours, Diego interrupted. Richard said if we're not there by dawn, he starts cutting pieces off Isabella's parents. There was a pause as Chen processed the impossible situation. All right. But you wear wires. You follow the extraction protocols we drilled, and you don't take any unnecessary risks. Define unnecessary, Isabella said grimly. Anything that gets you killed before we can arrest Richard. As they prepared to leave for what might be their final confrontation, Isabella and Diego moved with the practiced efficiency of partners who trusted each other completely. They checked weapons, reviewed escape routes, and synchronized their watches, like soldiers preparing for battle, because that's what they were now, soldiers in a war they'd never asked to fight, against an enemy who'd already taken everything from them except each other. Isabella. Diego paused in the doorway, looking back at her. Whatever happens up there ... I know, she said softly. I love you too. They left the cabin as the first light of dawn began to creep over the mountains, driving toward a confrontation that would either free them from Richard's nightmare forever, or ensure that they faced eternity together. Either way, Isabella realized, they would face it as partners, as equals, as two people who had chosen love over safety and would live or die with the consequences. The abandoned Black Mountain mining facility looked like something from a post-apocalyptic movie, rusted equipment scattered across a barren landscape, buildings slowly being reclaimed by nature, and an overall atmosphere of desolation that perfectly matched Isabella's mood. She and Diego parked their rental car at the facility's main gate and began walking toward the largest building, a processing plant that looked like it could hide an army of Richard's men. Each step felt like it might be their last, but Isabella found herself oddly calm. The waiting was over. Whatever happened next, at least they would face it together. Motion sensors show 3 heat signatures in the main building, Diego reported, quietly touching the earpiece that connected them to Detective Chen's team. 2 smaller ones that could be your parents, 1 larger one that's probably Richard.